Okay, here we are. I'm Jan Hutchins, and I'm with the Men's School faculty, and we are going to bite into a big piece today. What do we stand for? What is masculinity? There are a lot of ways it's being described these days. We have an experience we'd like to share and hopefully excite you with the possibilities of looking at this in a holistic way. So, Snake, I thought what you said as we were doing the prep here was brilliant. It's the words that have gotten you confused and are confusing us, you say.
Yeah, I was just expressing earlier how disappointed I am in some of the words that are bandied about as basically attacks. White privilege, male hierarchy, issues that are in the news and popular and overused. And I kind of long for a time with simpler words that are more personal, like respect, compassion, forgiveness, skill-based things that take time to learn and take time to express, but are genuine to both male and female, genuine to human beings. And, you know, we're talking about the hard hit that men and hierarchy has taken in recent years. And in many ways, rightly so. There's many men in the world who abuse their power, who have not been respectful, who, in my estimation, have a lot to learn. But I want to speak for a moment to 30 years ago when I started doing men's work. Spending a weekend with men was the last thing I cared to do because I'd been painting with that same brush. Most of the men that I'd come up against in the past couldn't be trusted or were out to take advantage one way or another. At least that was my belief coming in. And what I discovered instead was men willing to be honest. Men whose integrity was important to them, not just how they looked. Men who cared for one another. And I'm wondering where those words disappear to when we get embroiled in these political and widely publicized issues that we have as a culture. What about respect? How difficult it is to respect someone other than yourself, because culturally we're encouraged to see them as adversaries and do battle with them, not consider a different perspective and learn from it. I'm here to say there's many men out there that I highly value and respect, and they aren't all the same. And there's men out there that are jerks. I've run into them too. But the ones that I gravitate towards are the ones who are trying to live a life in integrity. And that's what I want to encourage. I don't want to fight endlessly over people who just don't want to get it, don't want to change, don't want to respect, don't want to forgive. I've had it with that.
You know, with the expansion of the gender continuum and the attempt to erase the strictly male, strictly female, and all those characteristics, it's created an expanded language. And it's a language, it's a diversity language, which is a good thing, but it's also a language where if you don't use the right word, you're in trouble. Like Dave was talking before about, you know, responding to a Me Too thing with encouragement, and one word was misconstrued, misunderstood, judged. And I think that men whose emotional literacy skills are already fairly narrow, as we attempt to open that up, we end up being silent because we don't know what to say. And in the face of a woman who is really passionate and intense about standing where she stands and maybe she's a radical feminist and she's all for the collapse of the patriarchy. It's hard to have a conversation with that. And it feels like in the time of Trump, where things are getting polarized, this whole gender conversation is getting very polarized. So, in the face of that, I say, so what is the language that might be of value? Kind of like what you were sharing, Snake. And I try to remember that masculine and feminine are gender neutral. It's not about the gender. It's not about the genitalia. It's about a complementary set of principles that, if we live by those principles, we live in a good way. So how do you define masculine? Well, masculine is clear, it's direct, it's forthright, it's upright, it's vertical, it's penetrative. Each one of those can be extracted into good behavior and bad behavior, but the principle remains the sacred principle. If I'm endeavoring to define myself from the principles by which I live, rather than the language or the hair or the colors or the pink or the blue, all of that other bullshit, that's confusing. Because I like to wear pink and I like to have my hair long. What does that mean for me? Where do I find myself as a heterosexual male on that continuum that has these attributes and these things that gravitate towards?
And has given his life to making the world a better place by helping men find themselves.
Thank you. So I'm kind of struggling through the language, but I know what it feels like and what it means to be a good fucking man. And good fucking men are men that live the kind of principles and values and ideals that we've learned to cultivate in ourselves and to share with the men that come into our circles. But this political correctness, I find it very challenging.
Well, and for me, this is where initiation is is the piece, right? Because as you both were saying, there's these traits and qualities that we, as a society, as parents, I would say, want our kids to have. Like that, we want all of our people to have, honesty, respect, willingness to do work, purpose and mission, being willing to listen, integrity. And those are things we want to teach our kids to do. But for kids, they're more kind of abstract things. They're ways that they're figuring it out, they're looking at it, they're experimenting, and they push and they resist. And then there's a moment when there's the opportunity for initiation, right? And whether it's a Mankind Project weekend or a bat mitzvah, whatever that initiation process is, all of a sudden these traits become crystallized and embodied, right? Now, it's not just you're learning about being honest and respectful. Now it's your job. Now it's who you are. Now it's how you show up in the world. And what we see in so much, I think, of this, this toxic masculinity that gets talked about so much is men or women who may be embodying that toxic masculinity also, because as we said, it's not gender specific, but men in general who haven't been initiated. They never embodied the actual traits. They never got past being a 7-year-old trying to figure out what honesty means, right? And we said this before, that's Trump, right? He's not really a man, right? He doesn't embody masculinity. He embodies something different, and he's incomplete. And it's the incomplete men, the incomplete masculine is what is so dangerous and what is causing so much trauma in the world.
And so from my perspective as a journalist in the day, the ideas matter. And one of the ideas that's coming out of this for me is we, and a lot of the men we know, are working very hard, are giving their lives to make the world a better place and live and holding each other to levels of integrity I certainly would have never tried to manage on my own. So I'm just reactive to saying men do bad and want a world where they say some men do bad and all of us need to help them be better, as opposed to feeling as though all the work I know you're doing and the other men I so respect and the Mankind Project don't exist. No, we very much exist. And we're, I think, calling ourselves and anyone who wants to come join us into a new kind of masculinity that women want us to have. But part of the problem is, as we call men into their own power, this power can feel threatening if someone doesn't see it as loving, powerful, in integrity, compassionate warrior power, and sees it as another manifestation of the enemy, and that's going to end up hurting me, etc. So I get the paradox, and I feel myself coming to the defense of men because I know we deserve it.
You know, I saw toxic masculinity in a couple of articles that I read this week. And while I understood the language and what it was pointing to, something in me just felt a little uncomfortable in those two words together. And this conversation just fleshed this out for me. Masculine is not toxic. Feminine is not toxic. Certain male behaviors, certain female behaviors, nobody talks about toxic femininity, okay? Toxic female behavior, toxic maleness, toxic femaleness. Now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty of what that behavior looks like. When you put something toxic next to something that's sacred and principled and valued, that's a mismatch.
It's difficult.
There's nothing toxic about masculinity.
It's difficult too, and I jump right in there in terms of part of this whole maturing, growing, is coming up against really complicated concepts that defy a simple definition. For instance, tell me your difference between shame and pride, sex and lust, pain and heartbreak. And I'm not saying the difference, I'm saying your difference, because each of us bounce off those things differently and find our own place with it. But I know for years, for me, I confused shame and pride. I had a fair amount of shame and covered it with pride. I had to untangle those two. And that was my journey. And each of us have our own read on this. So the whole notion of trying to come up with labels that attach and translate from human being to human being seems a fool's errand to me.
Ooh, beautifully said. Beautifully said. So we're about 15 minutes into this. I think that's enough for our one bite. Anybody have anything they need to get said here before we call this the first part done? Cool. Yeah, it's about all of us. One way or another, the answers are going to have to be reached by all of us. Thank you for listening. Next time.